Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome those in our conference room today, along with those online. It's Wednesday, June 21st. It is 1:16 p.m. This is the quarterly meeting of the Wasatch Front Economic Development District Committee. I'm Gage Furr. I'll be conducting this afternoon. Before we start into the agenda items, we're going to start with introductions. And we'll start with those in the conference room. Let's start with Chris Roybal down at that end and work our way around. Yeah, and just to remind everybody, push that little button, and when it goes green, that way the people online can hear us as well.
Okay,
There you
try
go.
one more time.
Good, perfect.
Chris Roybal, Northern Utah Economic Alliance. Good to be here.
Alan Packard, Jordan Valley Water Conservancy District.
Holland Wilbanks, Big D Construction. Oh, Trina Kittleson, Better City.
Jason Godfrey with Better City.
Marsha White, WFRC.
Commissioner, to you.
Commissioner Blaine Fackrell, Morgan County, and boy, it was a hike upstairs. The elevator was not working.
Oh, no.
Sean Milne with Bragg, Bear River Association of Governments, here on behalf of Box Elder County's portion in Brigham City.
Chris Sloan with Group One Real Estate, representing Twilla County.
Luis Garcia, WFRC.
Great, thanks. Now, and Rosie will introduce herself and then do an online roll call.
Okay, Rosie Hernandez, WFRC. And online, we have Jordan Chandler, Andrew Gruber, Shailene Gee, Blake Thomas, Daniel Royal, Edward Bennett, Ginger Chin, Hugh Van Wagenen, Jared Stewart, Julie Snowball, Mark Nold, Mayor Debbie Nguyen, Mayor Karen Lang, Megan Townsend, Michaela Jordan, Miranda Jones Cox, Neil Berube, Nick Fritz, Rachel Custer, Randy Elliott, Ryan England, Ryan Steinbagel, Sandra Llewellyn, Stephanie Russell, Susie Becker, Tiffany McClelland. And that is all I see. If I missed anyone, or if you entered after the roll call, please enter your name in the chat for the record. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Rosie. So Ted, you came in after. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Ted Knowlton, Deputy Director at Wasatch Front Regional Council.
Thanks, Ted. And I wanted to make sure everybody understood that our Vice Chair, Mayor Nguyen, is online with us. Appreciate her participating online, Mayor of Twilla, and a big advocate for this committee. Thanks, Mayor, for being with us this afternoon. With that, let's go to our agenda items. One, welcome introductions. We'll start with an action item, which is I'm looking for a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting, March 15th, 2023. Got a motion?
Second.
And a second. I'm going to call a motion. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 I'm going to rule the motion carries. Thank you. The minutes are approved. I just wanted to take a few minutes to review the upcoming budget and our finances, and make sure everybody's aware that we have awarded the 3-year planning grant from the Economic Development Administration. And I think that Marsha is going to take just a couple minutes and show us the budget for the upcoming 3 years. And also, while she's doing that, we'll review the WFEDD logo. Marsha, do you want to start with the budget, then go on to the logo?
Yep, Rosie, can you pull that up or do you? Perfect. So every 3 years, we go through this process of getting an EDA partnership planning grant. And based on our bylaws, I have to show you that we got the money and that we are allocating it. This is what we presented to the EDA, and a total of $420,000 we were awarded for the next 3 years, and most of it's contractual and salaries, and I mean, there's not a whole lot of extra in there, so that's it. There's the budget.
Okay, any questions on the budget? Okay, do you want to talk about our new logo?
I do, if you want to hit the next button. So we have, this is kind of exciting. You see the Wasatch Front Regional Council logo, and what we have been using is the Wasatch Front Economic Development District. It's very similar to our other logo, and we just wanted to make sure that we had a different logo. I don't know if you've seen things like the Transportation and Land Use Connections logo. And so we internally came up with a few logos, worked on it, but this is, if you want to hit the next button, Rosie, we are introducing the very simple Wasatch Front Economic Development District logo that will go on our will also go on our, any pamphlets that we put out, or those kind of things. So yeah, there it is. There's our logo. So it won't have mountains, but it won't stand alone either. So you'll see it always with the Wasatch Front Regional Council logos.
Good. Any other questions or comments on the logo? So when do we expect to kind of see this in print, Marcia?
Well, as soon as this will probably be one of the first documents, the SEDS that we'll start putting it on. We'll start to put it out on any of our newsletters, those kind of things.
Great. Okay. Any questions or comments? Anyone online would like to make a comment or question on the logo? All right, seeing
Andrew,
Mr. Chair,
Andrew, go ahead.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, thanks. I actually just wanted to make a brief, I was a little slow to unmute. I wanted to make a brief supplemental comment about the budget, if I may. As Marcia noted, we received funding from the federal government to support the work of the EDD. But just as a reminder, and everybody knows this, we house the Economic Development District within the Wasatch Front Regional Council. And so it's an efficient approach to utilize, all of our staff and our resources and our facilities, rather than trying to have an independent entity. It's just a much more efficient approach. And so I guess I just would note that we're sort of contributing as an organization, WFRC, to trying to advance the economic development work on behalf of and in collaboration with all of you. And I think part of the other benefit that comes from that is that it allows us to administratively integrate economic development work with the transportation and land use planning that we focus on at WFRC. So it's not only efficient, like from a budget perspective, substantively, it helps to reinforce the fact that our economy, our land use, our transportation, our quality of life really are all tied together. So thanks.
Great. Yeah, good point to bring up, Andrew. Appreciate that. Any questions or comments to Andrew or regarding, before we move on to our next agenda item? All right, seeing none, let's go to our public comments. Now's the time that we are here to listen to feedback from members of the public. Anyone that would like to speak about the agenda today or other topics related to the EDD, now's your time to do it. We'd ask you to take 2 minutes, and now's the time. Anyone online? I don't see a lot of the public here today, so I don't think we have to worry about people here in the commission chambers. Okay. Well, we're going to be out in record time today, Marcia.
I wouldn't go that.
Okay, yeah. Well, we're not done yet. All right, seeing no public comment, let's go to our next agenda item. So as we're all aware, we've been working with the SIDS and our consultant over the past few years. or at least seems like a few years, but maybe not that long. But we have made a lot of progress. And Marcia and our consultants are here to give us an update and really where they are with recommendations, the progress we've made over the past couple of years as we've worked with the state, we've worked with the counties across the state and coming up and developing the SID. So Marcia, go ahead, and you want to take it over? Or should we turn it over to our consultants?
Sure, thanks, Chair. So it has seemed like a couple of years. I don't know that it has been that long. If you remember, the Better City has worked with us with our annual update. So they started with our annual update first. And so they moved over into the 5-year regional plan. But I just want to start by saying that this is a findings and recommendations. So we are at a point where we need some feedback. So if there's people online need to raise their hands or whatever as we go through this, that would be great, because we need some feedback on our findings and recommendations. Actually, our findings are pretty set. Our recommendations maybe aren't. So we really want to have a dialogue, and this is not a set in stone a presentation, but as we go through, we'll give you some ideas of what we did and what we've done, and we're going to kind of tag team here a little bit. So if you could pull that up, Rosie, that would be awesome. So
Hey, Marcia, you're probably about to do this, but will you please just make sure you remind everybody as a baseline what the SEDS is? What is the comprehensive economic development strategy that we're working on here?
Thanks for the reminder. So the comprehensive economic development strategy is a 5-year plan that is required from the Economic Development Administration in order to be an economic development district. With that said, we want to create a plan that we look out at the next 5 years and look at our region and say, what can we do? How can we do it? How can we do it better? And so our comprehensive economic development strategy is a 5-year plan that will look at high goals, that will look at key strategies, that will look at how do we get to those objectives, and how do we move the needle? And so you'll see as we go through this a little bit what we've done to do that. And from a standpoint from the Wasatch, as we talked about, the EDD sits underneath the Wasatch Front Regional Council, of which you know that, or many of us know, that the Wasatch Choice Vision is our kind of our guiding goal, or our guiding vision. And so we have tried to bring the strategies into more of that vision. And so if you let me go through this, I'll try to explain that as we go through.
And Marcia, let me just say, I think that's, hopefully it's clear because of our past meetings, that really these are recommendations that are directed toward the WFRC and accomplishing what we've established under the Wasatch Choice. And as Andrew mentioned in his first remarks, Wasatch Choice, really, we look at housing, transportation, economic development, really in a holistic view rather than individual, because we know that we have to accomplish and look at all those areas before one can be successful, especially economic development. So with that, is that accurate, Andrew? Based upon the Wasatch Choice vision that you set?
You said it better than I did, Mr. Chair.
All right, I don't know about that. Okay, so, and Better City, we know that we had a mayor that's related to that group, a previous mayor from Ogden. Yeah, yeah. Before we start that report, do you want to just, for those that maybe haven't had
That's a good idea.
the time or remember, it's been a little time since we actually started this process, only whatever it's been, a couple of years, a little bit of your background and the process you went through before we look at the final recommendations. Because since we haven't really talked about that, I think there's some probably people online that could appreciate a little background.
Sure. Yeah. Great. Thank you. Appreciate it, Commissioner. So I guess the background of our organization is that we were born in Ogden 12 years ago, actually 11 years ago. As the former mayor of Ogden, communities approached him for assistance with economic development. So now we're a nationwide firm. Still, our headquarters are still in Ogden. We have employees throughout the country, and we do work literally from Maine to Oregon. But this is still home, so we're really excited to be here and participate in this process. The SEDS is a really different process from strategic plans, because we don't talk about industry clusters like aerospace or healthcare or things like that, because those are covered in the state plan. We don't talk about recruiting companies because that's covered at the regional level or the county level. So it's really hyper focused on what is the role and the mandate of the Wasatch Front EDD, and how can it move the needle? How can it make a difference? And so Marcia's been really great about helping us to really home in on those focused specific actions that this group can affect. They'll make a difference, have impact. And then Marcia, I think you could probably talk best about the interviews and the process. Do you want to cover that? Because it's been a real partnership with Marcia.
Thank you for that explanation.
So just real quick, we'll go through the interviews and kind of give you some ideas of the SWOT analysis and some preliminary recommendations. Thank you for those that participated in either a survey or an interview or a focus group. We had over 60 stakeholders engage across the region. I was really proud that we reached out to youth. We reached out to diverse populations. And then both urban and rural. So I really feel like we touched upon a lot of different areas for our focus groups. Probably no surprise, high level topics that came out of that, transportation they all kind of relate to growth, but transportation, workforce development, recruiting, growth, housing, and then what is our role as a WFEDD? For those that have done any of the reading of the previous 5-year SEDS, there were 40 actions that were included in that. We learned the lesson that we needed to narrow that scope down. There's just no way to, in my opinion, move the needle on 40 different issues. And so we're going to focus on a lot less or fewer action items. Performance evaluation metrics, basically we're just, okay, I went to 5 meetings, or there were 3 community reinvestment areas developed or something like that. And I wanted to be able to track the metrics and see if we are actually, moving a needle, if we're actually doing something to help it. Move the needle on this economic development area. We recognize, and these are all the things that have to go into a SEDS, but we recognize that the resilience was limited to things like natural disasters and crickets and, cybersecurity attacks and those things, not related at all to any actions whatsoever of an economic opportunity. And so we're going to move that more into how can we emphasize economic resiliency, not necessarily how do we, we realized through an earthquake that we had, a downfall of economic resilience. We realized through COVID that we might have economic resilience issues. And so how do we work to fix that? And then when we were going through the SWOT analysis, and we all have done a strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, we realized that there were categories that were in each of those. So there was a strength, a weakness, opportunity, and threat. All transportation was was noted in each one of those. And so we really tried to be more specific on what those strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats might be. Just for clarity, and I just want to talk about, we've talked a lot about the Wasatch Choice Vision. You said it well, housing, open space, transportation, and creating centers or centers of community. And so those are the vision and the benefits or the goals at our level are things like we get livable and healthy communities. We, have housing choices. We have quality transportation choices. You can see all of that. So the vision was not something that we came up with. The vision was a group of people from all over the Wasatch Front coming together and saying, how do we want our Wasatch Front region to look like? And so it's not just a vision of one person or a consultant. It was a group of, Blaine, you might have even been part of that, or Sean, I don't know, or no? Well, we didn't invite you, so that's probably why. Yeah. Anyway, so the way that we need to look at this is that the comprehensive economic development strategy needs to support the vision, and how do we move the needle on some of the goals that are outlined there. And so from that context, we look at it as we have our SEDS, the statewide Utah Coordination Action Plan, which is the worst ever title, but they did one that incorporates all of Utah. And so we're trying to figure out how to bring that into the framework of how that fits into the Wasatch Choice Vision. We also do the regional transportation plan. Every AOG or every MPO does a regional transportation plan. How does that fit in? And how do we fit our local land use plans into the vision? And so all of this, and there's goes into the Wasatch Choice Vision. Ted, am I doing okay so far? All right. Whew, good. You can tell after 2 years they beat that into me. But it's necessary. And so we really believe that what we're doing now with the SEDS and not having 40 different objectives, but having 9 or 10 or however many that recommendations that come out of that actually will help move that needle will be so important to creating centers of communities and those kind of things. We looked at it from a couple of different angles. One is, what can we do as WFRC or the WFED, and what can we lead and what can our partners do? And so you'll see that throughout our presentation on what we think will really be important moving forward, because honestly, we can't do it all. We can't do human capital. We can't fix the human capital side. That's where our educational institutions need to come in and those kind of things. And so you'll see that as we move forward. But I will turn it over now to you. I'll quit talking.
Oh, that's great. And honestly, that's a great introduction, because this has been an amazing partnership, which is really critical. The way to make sure you've got a really poor plan is just to send some consultants out and say, let us know when it's done. Because, it's not going to be authentic. It's not going to be organic and really reflect the community's needs. And this has been a great partnership between Marcia and our team, and also Ted and Andrew and Megan have been very involved. And especially we appreciated the pushback, that they'll challenge us, and that really makes the plan a lot better. And we feel like it's more robust. Also appreciate all of the contributions from many in this room and so many in the communities who really made this a great plan. And also, by way of preamble, just want to say happy first day of summer to everyone. And if this is summer, I'm taking it. I froze my run last night. What is this? This is amazing. So more of this, and also T-1, right? Big day tomorrow, the draft. So we'd much rather talk about that, but we'll do this for now. So the Wasatch choice, we felt like from a standpoint of professional and personal and intellectual integrity, we didn't want to just accept, here's your marching orders. And so Andrew may have mentioned once or twice or 4 dozen times that the Wasatch choice is pretty important to look at. But we took a step back and said, okay, we're gonna analyze it from an intellectual standpoint and really see what the connection is between that centers concept and economic development. And I'm here to tell you that the correlation was very robust. It stood up very well. This is a very critical, visionary, strategically sound recommendation to pursue the centers concept. And you'll see it throughout the recommendations. You see on the bottom left-hand corner that icon. Every time there's something that it might not seem it's related, but in the specific recommendations, what we're going to present is high-level recommendations. In the specific recommendations in the actual report, there are things that are related to the centers concept. You'll see throughout these recommendations, we come back to centers, and they're really critical.
We might define centers just really quickly. And I think, and I'm probably not the best person, but I'll look to Ted to kind of help me a little bit with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So when we talk about city and town centers, we're talking about, these are historic downtowns or new stationary communities, and they always have basically 3 components. One is they're more intense than their surroundings. 2, they tend to have a mix of land uses. And 3, they're walkable. And then beyond that, they can really vary a lot. And they can be in more rural communities, suburbs, urban spaces. They're not about just center cities.
In creating communities around whether a little center or a big center is really important, I think is.
Yeah, thank you. And I was even thinking, boy, I swung and then I came up a little bit short. I was thinking, yeah, these places can give. You think about downtown Ogden, think about downtown Salt Lake. These are the places that we come to think of when we think of communities. They become synonymous with the identity of a community. And, when we're talking about growth in the fastest growing state in the country, there's this basic debate of where growth might occur. And this idea of centers, one of the beautiful things about it is it implies you don't have to accommodate growth everywhere. You don't have to densify everywhere. You can maintain low density, single family neighborhoods, rural character where people want it. But you have to accommodate growth somewhere because we're growing. And there's so many benefits that just ripple through the idea of allowing growth that people love in the places that make the most sense.
So one of the assumptions that we thought we'd test is, do centers impact transportation times? And so there are, I think, 9 or so centers identified currently in geographic centers. And it's interesting because there are different stages of development. Some are kind of centers name only, or some are more developed, right? But we looked at those and then did the data and says, okay, what are the transportation patterns in those areas that are identified as centers versus the region as a whole? The conclusion, there's a statistically significant difference in commute times in the amount of both for public transportation and drivers. Do centers work to decrease the need of the requirements for public transportation and transportation in general? Absolutely. The data point on the right is really interesting. This took us a lot of time to put together, but in the Wasatch Front Regional Council area, $17,000 per household is what is spent on transportation. That's state funding, federal funding, not federal, state, local, and households. So if you're able to reduce commute times, if you're able to decrease the amount invested per household, that's a significant savings. Multiply that by the number of households in the region. That's a lot of money that's being spent and a lot of opportunity to redirect spending towards areas that might make a higher quality of life rather than just sitting on the freeway. Oh, I got it. So the recommendations. Going back to, the mission statement up here, what is the role of the Wasatch Front Regional Council, convener, technical expert, planner, implementer? Throughout this, everything we've recommended isn't, collaborate or have meetings about, it's specific recommendations on how to move the needle. So for the centers, it's about becoming the technical expert and convening and showing both constituent organizations, communities, here's what centers mean and here's how it works. Trips, to, proliferating best practices, bringing in subject matter experts, and symposia, things like that, to make sure that everyone in the region, all the stakeholders in the region, understand this concept that Ted just articulated, and also they understand the benefits of it, right? And then the last thing is to celebrate the wins. So when there's densification around a center, that needs to be trumpeted loudly and make sure that there's inertia created around these, and developers and communities see that, oh, if you do this, you become the poster boy, the poster child for responsible, sustainable development.
And I just want to also say that centers aren't just big metropolitan centers. They can be small city centers. They could be Oregon City. They can be, but you have to figure that there's different names for them. That's a neighborhood center. I learned yesterday. City centers, so unless it's Box Elder and then Brigham. I gotta give Sean a hard time. But no, seriously, it's not just, big metropolitan city centers. It's all aspects of a city.
Wait, and that really highlights the importance of creating templates, right? Because you can see Ogden and Gateway and City Center and say, okay, I understand what a center is, right? But when you say it works in Brigham City, it works in Morgan, what does that look like, right? And so there has to be like a visual, right? And there has to be templates that the Wasatch Front Regional Council can provide to communities to say, oh, here's how you go about it. Here's the template for codes that you might want to do. Here's some reference photos, things that the communities can use to move the ball down the field. So it goes from theory to practice implementation. All right, the next topic is human capital. Does anyone want to guess what percentage of our interviews people mentioned the challenges with workforce? Yeah, 100%. Everyone, there's two topics that everybody talks about, right? They are? What's that? Affordable housing and labor force, right? So those are the two big elephants in the room. So we did a lot of analysis on the back end saying, okay, so what's driving the workforce shortage? How can we attack this? We thought, oh, okay, maybe it's labor force participation. Wrong. If you look at starting about 20, so it's the dark blue line there, starting about 2015, Utah starts to lead, frankly, the nation and definitely the region in labor force participation. So basically, all those who want to work are working for the most part, with some notable exceptions. So it's not a just try harder issue or just get more people working. The low-hanging fruit's not there. So what can be done? Well, there are three cohorts where the labor force participation is lower. Parents with young children, people with disabilities, only 50% of those with disabilities are in the labor force. So, start thinking about accommodations, right? And how can we bring these capable individuals into the labor force? And then people below the poverty level, I think that's 20 to 30% lower participation with people in the poverty level. One anecdote we heard that was really interesting. Someone went to the UTA to get a job as a bus driver, and they got to their interview by a bus. And they were told they couldn't get a job with UTA unless they had a car. And it's a really great anecdote because it really illustrates how hard it is to break the cycle of poverty and to elevate yourself. To work for the public transportation company, you have to have private transportation, right? There's just a lot of barriers. So, creating awareness around how to create more opportunities for people with disabilities, creating awareness of the challenges of people in poverty level, helping businesses understand, look, you want workforce, you need to accommodate. And honestly, parents with young children, that's all about remote work. That, in our meetings with Trina, we often get to see her children, right? And that's it's not even a trade-off. It's great. We love to see her kids, but she's able to join the workforce because she's in a remote work environment.
You want to ask for feedback as we go through this, or do you want to wait?
Yes, actually, thank you. So, yeah, love feedback on this one. Thoughts on actually the centers. Let's go ahead and talk about centers, then also this human capital, labor force participation. There's one more recommendation, but we'll stop here.
So let's talk about the centers just a second.
Yeah.
And so how does a city or county go about participating or, deciding where a center should be? Obviously, from where I come from it, we would really depend on private developers, private enterprise to set those, what we call the centers up. But what can a public entity do to encourage that? We talk about zoning laws. We talk about, TIF, economic incentives. Is there some type of blueprint out there? I mean, Morgan is not going to do probably the same thing that we do in Weber County or in Ogden City. So how do you, arrive at the best solution for any type of geographic location? And again, I think you said we have like 9 centers that we've talked about so far.
Is that the right number, Ted? I'm going off memory there, but is
I actually don't have the number in my head, but it's a lot more than 9.
that more than that?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So the first
how do you
answer to
go
the
about
question-
encourage, if it's a public-private partnership, which it appears to me it has to be.
Yeah.
How does the public take part in that development?
Well, Mr. Chair, I can talk a little bit about that. We do that in the course of developing the Wasatch Choice Vision, which is together with the Regional Transportation Plan, and we reach out to local governments and also the private sector, and we have this conversation about where do communities feel like are the best places to encourage growth. Now they're doing that, and we're having this conversation together with infrastructure. And I think that's part of that conversation of, if we're asking ourselves, where are we working with the market as opposed to against the market? Part of that is, well, the access that you get with a freeway interchange or a light rail station, that gives an area a leg up market-wise, and it can suggest to the private sector and to everybody, hey, that's a place where you might want to put a business or a home. So, and then, it's a question also of general plans and zoning and innovative financing techniques, and kind of coming at it from various angles, reducing barriers, creating incentives. But the short answer is, when we put together the Wasatch Choice Map and you look at a center, we all should know, well, that means a local government, that local government explicitly identified that location, and then in turn made a commitment to advance the vision into their planning and zoning.
So Commissioner, I think you really hit on the key point, because there's no fault in the plan. The plan is impeccable. It really is. It's visionary. It's got local buy-in. So then the question becomes, well, what's the gap, right? Which is your question.
Yeah.
And I think there's 2 parts. And to Ted's point, saying this is where you're going to do, or a good place for a center is step 1. Step 2 is how, right? And these templates, I think, are really critical to say, we'll help you create a template for how to zone that. You talk about incentives, potential incentive packages. And so I think there's a lot that can be done in educating the local communities and supporting them. The second piece is from the developer side. and I'm glad Holland's here. You can hop in if you want. But we've talked to developers across the country, and we asked them, why, compare building a center versus just a 50 acres, throw in homes, right? Where's the return highest? Any guesses? Most of the time is to build the homes, okay? And where's the level of difficulty the lowest? Oh, it's not even close, right? I mean, everybody knows how to build to put in 100 homes, piece cake. So in our experience, the developers have good hearts. They want to build things that they'll last and they'll make a difference in the communities. But there's some barriers to that. One is the knowledge. Okay, what does it look like? How do you go about it? And two is oftentimes they're fighting the very communities, that they're trying to assist because of zoning, because of permitting and so forth. And so we should be fast tracking. We should be just doing everything we can to support these developments. But if the zoning and the regulations aren't ahead of it, it's actually the opposite. Holland, do you have any insights you'd like to share?
Well, you're spot on the development side on where your revenues are going to be more
Right.
impactful. However, the quality of life aspect of that is going to play heavily into, where people want to be and live and enjoy their lives. I did have a quick question, is maybe I'm not fully understanding the definition of center. Is it privately owned, or are these public spaces that the local entity, like a park or fountains and things like that, are gathering spaces that
Yes,
I'm
the
behind
answer is yes.
to both? Okay. Yeah, I can see that being a dual partnership, but ultimately, who ends up owning this space and maintaining it and keeping it vibrant and all of that stuff? Do we have answers?
That if I think it's more of a geographical space, and so it could be a little bit of both. It could be, but I think it's a geographical space. So let's just use Salt Lake City downtown. It becomes Salt Lake City is a center.
Okay.
Obviously, there's private owned entities. There's open space. There's all sorts of things within it. It's more of a geographic space of density.
Got it. Okay. I'm thinking a location.
Yeah.
So I would guess I was off on that. Like one spot, like here's our
Not
city center.
not something like maybe Daybreak or
Yeah.
it's more of a geographical center.
Okay. Well, and then I do think to that point too, how you incentivize developers to find, performers are so hard to put together right now as it is to have something pencil. So now you're asking for even a layer above that to see, and we want to, we want to encourage this type of development. Obviously, it gives us a much better quality of life, but how can we make that financially feasible in the long run for these, local and national customers that are looking at Utah?
Yeah, and that's the key point, right? If you think about it, the property taxes, if you took 100 acres and you did a center versus just single family homes, it's not close, right? The long-term property taxes. So the question becomes, and we talked about transportation, cost of deferment or cost avoidance, right? Because we know that in centers, people travel less. You got all these public goods, pollution and all these public goods. Is there a way to transfer some of those public benefits back to the developers to help level the field, right?
Well, one of the things I know, Marcia, you guys have worked a lot on is the higher value of real estate when you're next to a trail or when you're closer to public transportation. So yeah, so if you can translate this concept of a center to the real estate values increasing, then maybe you have somewhat of an argument of, if center is actually a defined word, like a TIF has to have a project area. So a project area could be defined as a center as well. That could go in some of the language.
Yeah.
Well, let me just briefly, and I will not elaborate, but I'll invite perhaps Andrew if he wants to, but there are tools that are kind of like TIF, like establishing a redevelopment area. There's a HTRZ, Housing Transportation Reinvestment Zone mechanism that lets you capture that increment and then reinvest it in a variety of different kinds of things. So there are tools out there like that you're talking about.
A couple of, are you?
Go for it.
Couple of things online.
Sure.
Michaela is asking if the rate of participation in the labor force for those with disabilities is different today because of a more virtual option than those before COVID. Did you find any data at that trend over time? Yeah, sorry. So Michaela's asking if she'd be curious to know if there was any rate of participation in the labor force for those with disabilities now, because there's a lot more virtual options than before COVID. Did you find any data?
Michaela, that's an excellent question. Intuitively, you'd think so. We'll have to look.
Yeah.
I will get back to you. That's an excellent question. So are we making progress on that?
And then Nick Fritz has mentioned that he thinks there's a particular opportunity to increase labor force participation in the neurodiverse community. Adults with autism participate in the labor force at an extremely low rate. And then he has a link to a report that we can get sent out. Thanks, Nick.
Excellent. That's an excellent point. To solve the workforce shortage, just try harder is not going to get you there. That there needs to be solutions. And isn't it neat? Isn't it really inspiring that you can actually lift society at the same time as solving this workforce issue? It's a good thing, right? If we create more opportunities for those who are neurodiverse and who have small children at home and things like that. So yeah. All right. Oh, I've got it. The last thing on human capital is, oh, mercy. Let's see. So Rosie, I think can you click on that chart to the bottom right? So this is from the Gardner Center, and it's going to work impeccably because this stuff never fails. And there's two lines here. The top line is white, identified as white race, and the red line is a minority. And can you scroll up just a little bit? Okay, I want you to focus on kind of where the hump is, and that's the ages that's the workforce ages from 20 to 50. So look at your workforce, and this starts at 2010. And then Rosie, click on the arrow button.
Right above the legend.
It's actually in the chart, down, closer, warmer, there, hot. Good. Okay, so this is going to move it over time. So here's actuals, and then we're going to start going to projections. And look at that workforce age and the demographics and what's happening with the minority population. And it'll end up out to 2060. So, we're talking 40 years out. But even by 2030, 2040, yeah, we started at about 20%. So the minority population in the workforce age is about 20% today. By 2030, it's at 30%. Okay, that's a 50% increase in the minority population that'll be in the workforce. Now, why does that matter? Because, and you can go back to the slide now. Thanks, Rosie, appreciate it. Currently, educational attainment and the workforce industry, the industries and the skills of minorities historically lags the non-minority populations. And so we're basically building workforce right now, and we're incentivizing and we're planning, recruiting industries based on current skill sets. But unless we change outcomes for minority groups, we're going to have a mismatch in the future between skills and the jobs that we're creating. This becomes, the achievement of minority groups becomes one of the most important workforce considerations that's out there because of demographics. It's just pure demographics. You either get ahead of this or you get blindsided by it. Comments, questions?
Is this just Utah or is this nationally?
This is Utah. Yep. So 10% of Hispanic youth are enrolled in higher education, 2018. I think it's probably a little bit better now, but you know, there's your bright red light flashing, right? Okay. Oh, yeah.
Will you repeat the question?
So his question is, what happened to the other 90%? So they either don't go on to higher education or this, or they enroll in technical schools as well. So it's just higher education, not non-clean technical. Okay, so next topic is the economic development ecosystem. So again, acknowledging that the Wasatch Front EDD isn't driving most of these things, it plays a role as the convener and the technical expert. And so, you know, the Utah Coordinated Action Plan that Marcia loves the name so much, you know, they say there's a role here to make sure that we're upskilling or helping, supporting the economic development professionals. So the role of the EDD then is to do the planning, the technical assistance, advocacy, research, all those things that support the local, and in some ways the state. Now, pause. Utah is among the best at economic development in the world. I mean, honestly, this is a core competency. Economic development is done here almost better than almost anywhere. And so it's not like we're trying to raise a C student to A. We're already at the head of the class. It's really just getting better. It's just creating more resources. So I think it's important to say that. But so the role then is in support and advocacy and so forth. Part of that is to create a data hub. And Marcia, do you want to talk about this? This is kind of your baby, or do you want me to?
Yeah, this one of the things as we talk about, and you'll see, you know, we've got a lot of data, publicly owned data that we can access. But it seems like in order to get more precise on what we need to do, we need to try to figure out how to get maybe more privately owned data and creating more of a place for people to go to access the data, and so that we're all on the same page, so that we're not, you know, we're not looking at one place and another place and another place and getting a different answer. That maybe that we can start to create more of this regional data hub and using it, and then to use that data to track the progress and how we're doing on our strategies and goals, and then also on the statewide strategies and goals. Those are that's all I have.
Yeah, good. Questions, comments on that?
I'm looking at Chris, but I'm sure you buy a lot of data, and so you're able to really work on, you know, really honing in on it, where maybe Morgan County isn't able to buy that data. And so trying to figure out how to bring that together. And so, or even maybe not even buy it, but maybe even having it so that the planning folks can go and know exactly where to go and not have them spinning their wheels. So.
Yeah, I like that idea, Marcia, for your group to have, but I guess my thought or recommendation would be, you know, hone in on 5 or 10 things that you want to be really good at data collecting, and let other groups that, you know, maybe the Department of Workforce Services does their thing with labor data, and, you know, real estate data is in another database, but maybe there's a half a dozen things that this group would really focus on from a data perspective. And then all the local city, county groups that don't have access, you know, are not going to go out and try to dig around and find that. No, oh, hey, you know what? Wasatch Front Regional Council, they're really good at keeping this quarterly, annual data banks available for me, and you end up being a good resource for it. So I think it's a good idea. But I would try to narrow that down to, maybe you've already done that. Maybe I'm behind you a little bit, but focus in on some key stuff that you guys can be good at that's not already being supplied somewhere else.
Excellent. Yeah, fill gaps. One thing, one element of Marcia's vision that I think is really exciting is what if there was an index that said the Wasatch Front Economic Health Index that took a bunch of metrics and said, we've put them together and our index is at a 6.7 now and is a 6.4 last year. That's noteworthy. That's newsworthy, and that could help really create awareness around specific issues. And hey, we're making improvements on equity, but we're coming backward on housing affordability. But I think those kinds of, if you have specific metrics you're tracking over time, that becomes powerful to driving the public discussion. So great point, Chris. Anything else?
Yeah, so Marcia, do you have an idea of what data we're trying to collect right now? I mean, because there is a lot of data available out there from various sources, and I don't see any reason that we want to duplicate that. So, and I agree with Chris, we should narrow that down as far as what role can, WFRC or EDD play in gathering data that may not be available out there that could be useful to both the private side and the public side. I don't know if you've thought about that at all.
I'll say no. I've thought about a few things, but not a ton. And I've been actually working with the county economic development directors and trying to really hone in on what the gaps that they're seeing. So,
Okay.
but we haven't gotten there yet. How's that?
Yeah.
Can I highlight one piece of data? And I'm not sure whether it's in the draft. Words are escaping me, but the data pieces that we're talking about for the SEDS, but it's really gets at this question of economic efficiency and how land development interacts with transportation. And we use this phrase access to opportunities, but we basically just mean how easy is it for the workforce to get to businesses, measured by, if you're a firm, an average firm, how many workers can get to your site within a typical commute. And, it's those kinds of measures that firms use to identify where they're gonna locate. And we can use them to track how well are we doing overall, cities working with transportation systems, centered development, et cetera, to just make it easy for economic interaction to occur. So that's one of these things where we are ramping up and going to launch here in August, and we ought to explicitly make that part of that WFEDD conversation too.
Excellent. And
We affectionately call it ATO, access to opportunity.
Sure, maybe a suggestion for a couple of areas that you guys could collect data that would be useful to the local communities. I know that cities and counties, I know Weber County just finished a big master plan. You can go find it, if you dig around, I'm sure on their website. But, if you're sort of a one-man show somewhere, maybe you collect all the cities and counties' current master plans, you make them available to everybody so that they can go benchmark and look at those. And then secondly, with these economic centers that you're talking about, if there are 9 or 10 of them that you guys have profiled in our region, well then create a profile of that economic center, put it on your website, and people can go benchmark off of those 8 or 9 or 10 economic centers. Here's what they've done. Here's how they planned it. Here's how they've been successful. Maybe I can learn something as a local city, county rep, or city council member, whoever it is, and they know they can go to your site to collect that data.
Those are great. The goal of the SEDS is to create actionable recommendations, right? And so on the back end, you should be able to measure that. And I think that's a key part of this. The data hub is like, well, we need to be able to track, for you as a board, you want to be able to say, look, we've made progress in these areas. Here's the metric, here's the change over time, and here's the effect we're having, and how can we make that different? And I know Marcia is really excited to have, accountability, because we want to move the ball down the field. And I think the metrics really lend itself to that. Okay, moving on. This last piece here, this third little bullet, the support projects, this gets to kind of the role of the SEDS, which is when the EDA does grants for municipalities or communities, counties, it always says, is it reflected in the SEDS for the region, the regional SEDS? So there has to be a section which is the catch-all, which makes sure that anything that anyone comes up with, we say, yep, we can point to it and say, look, it's right there in the SEDS. So someone wants to do broadband, we mention it in the SEDS. So this is kind of our check the box exercise to make sure that it fills that role for the EDA. I'll come back to it. There's also, though, an opportunity for the EDD to help communities identify funding opportunities and, Mary, hey, we've got this project going on, and oh, hey, there's this funding source, and make sure the twain meet. We did an analysis, and Utah is the lowest in the region and maybe in the country. It's among the lowest in the country, definitely lowest in the region for federal funding. So, maybe that's a function of, go it alone, bootstrap it. But, we don't want to be a welfare state, but maybe there's some opportunities to get more federal funding that's going to other neighboring states.
Can I add my 2
Yeah, please.
So I was at an EDA conference about a month ago. Our state received about $20 million in EDA funding. Wyoming, very much less dense than Utah, received $18 million. So I don't know, it's that, I don't know that I don't know if it's because we're just growing so fast that we don't have time to do the projects, or that no one wants to apply for them, or if it just doesn't fit into the SEDS or what, but we need to figure out how, if people want to do projects, there is opportunities to get funding.
Great. Okay, now, I'm going to tell a little.
Hey, can I
anecdote. Yeah, go
ask
ahead,
a
Andrew.
question? Hey, can I ask you a question about that, about the federal funding?
Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew, can you hear me? Yeah. One thing, when I heard that statistic that we're not bringing in our relative share of federal funding, it was troubling to me. And I think we should be always looking for whatever opportunities we can find, as long as we're being efficient, not spending a lot of time and money to chase a relatively limited amount of money. Having said that, we should be as effective as we can bringing in federal resources, given that our tax dollars are paying for those, and Chinese, debt purchases as well. But having said that, I guess one technical question, a speculation about why our rate of federal funding might be lower, is that it might be, the data might be skewed because of the COVID, the pandemic. Our economy performed a lot better during the pandemic than most states in the country. And I speculate that may have translated into fewer federal dollars coming in to Utah than other states in the nation. And so I just wonder if what's at play there is not so much that we haven't been effective in getting federal dollars, but it's more a product of the unusual flow of federal funding over the past several years. Do you happen to know how that played into this?
No, we owe you that response. We're doing that research, but yeah, that's a valid observation that we need to test for sure.
Yeah, I would suggest that's another good thing for the Wasatch Front Regional Council. If you guys could be a sort of a data source for federal funding, whether it's for, I hear about all of these, there's $1 billion in this fund for wastewater treatment. There's this much money in this group for another piece of infrastructure. I can't find it. I just hired an intern this summer and I said, hey, I want you to spend half your time tracking down all these federal funding sources for infrastructure, these supposed grants that are out there, these mystery grants. I've got different grant writers in the state of Utah. They don't know where this money is either. So I'm sure that some of it's real, but I don't know where it is. We care about it because we want infrastructure for these office and industrial parks. If we can add to the local infrastructure that's already being done. So if there's a way to simplify that and coordinate that data for local communities and developers to, to do some matchmaking there, I raise my hand and say amen to that. So we're asking for your help for sure.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, Andrew raises a really valid point that we see a lot of examples of communities and states that that chase projects based on what the funding is, which is backward, right? What you've described, on the other hand, is we're doing this project anyway. If there's money out there, by then we better go find it, figure out how to get it. At least with the EDA, especially with the EDA and even with other federal organizations, Marcia really has the role as the kingmaker. They like to work through the COGS or EDDs. And so, yeah, the proper role of the EDD is to be that convener and that matchmaker. Sorry.
Maybe before we move on, Michaela wanted to also say that she thinks it's important to note that there is a difference between the present availability of data and the usability of it.
Yeah.
Some of the national databases are hard to find and or hard to navigate. So I think this would add to the value of being more accessible to her.
Yeah, great point. Great point. Okay. I want to tell an anecdote and you'll bring it back around. So pre-pandemic, we were a Utah-based company. All of our workforce was, in an office in Ogden. And does anyone want to venture a guess as to what the composition, the demographic composition of our workforce looked like before COVID? White. Latter-day Saint, mostly male. We had one token female. And then post-COVID, we went virtual. And I said, well, we probably need to diversify a little bit. So we hired our first non-Utah white employee, a young woman who is Black from inner city Cleveland, whose background was nothing like any of ours. That hire transformed our company and blessed my life immensely. I spent a lot of time with her and just really changed me. Monet, wonderful individual. She's since gone on, been promoted, and got a great. But the point is, it really changed the way we look at things, and she was able to challenge us in really important ways. We think we can speak for other populations and speak for other people, and she helped me to see that's false. That I said, oh, don't your people think like this? And she's like, hello. Okay. And now today we have someone from Bolivia, from Turkey, from China, Fulbright scholar from China. And the craziest one is someone from South Florida. I mean, that's crazy foreign, right? And that has been transformational for us as an organization to have cultural awareness that we thought we had before because we've lived overseas and had experiences. It's not the same. All right, why are we talking about this? As we look around the room here and online, I think that's a challenge that we have in the state where you look at the actual population is pretty diverse, but the decision-making population is not diverse. And I think if we think we can represent them based on our life experiences, those other communities, I don't, that's not my experience, I think that's a vain hope. So our recommendation is to revise revise the bylaws of the EDD to create positions that reflect diversity. And then also to encourage communities. So, some of you are here representing a city or a county and encourage the constituent communities. When you send a representative, try and send someone who has maybe a little different life experience, a little background, at least to some of them. That will greatly enrich the experience and make sure that other voices are being heard. So I'll stop there and ask for your input or thoughts.
I think that opens up a little bit of a tricky slope as well. I completely agree that adding the diversity to the organization transforms the mindset and broadens the scope of what you can offer, both publicly and privately. I do think you always have to hire the most qualified person. So if you're pigeonholing a position that can only be a South Floridian, somebody under 5 feet tall or something, but that I think how you worded it would be pretty interesting so that regardless, you do bring in the best qualifications, whether what color, age, race, anything beyond that. So that's just one of my thoughts. I've seen too many great people passed over that probably could have brought more to an organizations because they didn't fit the whatever the description of the person should look like. If that
Okay,
makes sense.
yeah, on both sides. I'm sure it happens on both sides.
100%,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, great. Other thoughts?
I think one of my thoughts too is from, we've added this and we're still playing with the second bullet, but trying to figure out inclusive policies. So making sure that as we do land use, that we're not only putting high density in an area where typically it has been an impoverished area or something like that. And so really thinking about it from that perspective as well. So creating a community where everyone's welcome kind of thing. And so we're kind of playing around with that second. I didn't know how to, we're kind of, I don't know. I'm
We're
trying to
figuring it out.
figure that second bullet out. So.
The reason I led with that, we reordered the slides just before we started this, because I led with the economic case, right? That in 20 years or actually in 15 years, your workforce is going to be, a third, no, like 40% minority. So there's real economic justification for making sure those voices and those experiences are being represented and heard. That's a rubber meets the road economic kind of an argument. So, okay.
I'll throw in one thing on this. There is a group that we are a founder of with other organizations called the Wasatch Choice Community Advisory Council. And it is a diverse group that represents lots of different portions of our community. And I just mention it to the WFEDD because let's say that you have a few really interesting questions about economic development. You want to understand the perspectives of people that are not like those around the room. That is a group that we could tap into as an EDD.
Great, thanks, Ted. Just a side note that reminded me, there's been some really interesting studies about economic and social mobility. And among the most critical factors is who you know, your group, your not peers, but the people within your sphere of influence. And so centers actually can have a key role in driving economic mobility if you mix different socioeconomic groups. Because if I'm an intern or if I want to be an engineer, but I've come from a disadvantaged background, who do I know that's an engineer? Who can point me in that direction, right? But if you can have people who are neighbors who have a wide variety of backgrounds, that is extremely powerful for changing social and economic realities. So, okay, we're on the home stretch. Just a few more here. Businesses or the business. So, what role can the region play? So, diversity in business equals economic resilience. And here's what's called the Hoffman Index. If you speak German, hopefully I said that right. But basically, a high score means that you have a very diverse economy and you've got a lot of industries. And so, there's an inherent bias in this, because if you're a smaller community like Tooele and Morgan there, you just don't have the scope to really have a lot of diversity. So it's not necessarily a pejorative or a negative that Morgan is at 52% while Salt Lake is at 94%. It's largely a function of size, right? But these, for Salt Lake, Weber and Davis and even Tooele to be that high on the Hoffman Index is really healthy. And it's something that has to be encouraged, because if one industry tanks for whatever reason, AI or, whatever supply chain, you have other industries you can rely on. Okay, the second point is really interesting. So we came in with the theory that when Micron announces that it's going to open a new plant in Lehigh, that all you're doing is, because the workforce is already tapped out, so all you're doing is there's that many more Californians are going to have to move here to fill those jobs, right? So that was our theory. Guess what the data said? Most of the jobs that are filled, especially the high end, are filled by local, regional hires. So it really blew up our assumption. Guess where the workers who come in from out of state, guess what the predominant industries are that they go to? I'm not gonna make you guess, because you won't guess it right. It's construction. Construction is number one and manufacturing is number two. So I know you all know anecdotes, because you all know someone that moved from California who's your neighbor who's an engineer. But those are the exceptions, that if you look at the data, it's actually the people that are moving in are taking the lower skill jobs. Who knew? So
Jason,
economic
here's
development's a good
another
idea.
way to look at that
Sure.
though. So Texas Instruments is gonna, bring their chip plant here. And yeah, we hope that they hire most of their workforce from within Utah. They'll have to recruit some jobs, some talent from out of state. But somebody who's making $52,000 a year now at XYZ Corporation looks at that Texas Instruments site, says, huh, my same skill set, sorry. I'm gonna go from 52 to $65,000 a year. So I'm gonna, upgrade my employment, and my quality of life's gonna go up, and somebody else is gonna take my job, and everybody moves up the food chain. So that's part of what we try to do is, create higher paying jobs. Yes, they do take from other companies, but if we're all kind of, rising the tide together, it makes for a better place to live and work and spend your money.
And the data bears that out. The data bears out that that's actually exactly what's happening. So our recommendations are, when recruiting, and so we talked about how the Wasatch Front plays a role in working with its constituent organizations for information and so forth. This is one where maybe the information might flow upward at the state level, and just regionally though, when we're recruiting businesses, look at how we're wages, want to raise wages, but also let's look at space and workforce constraints. So, let's not put pressure on sectors that are already overstrained. And especially that space thing, when I come back to centers, I don't know why this doesn't have a center icon, because this is critical. If someone says, I'm gonna, bring jobs to a center, that's a home run. That should be, we should be rolling out the red carpet for those people. Similarly, if someone says, I'm gonna bring remote jobs to Utah somehow, that's a win, okay? Transportation goes down, we talked about the disabled population, the young family population, that's a huge win. You can't cut ribbons on those. So it's not, it's not as fun, but those are really valuable jobs. So, so create a framework around targeting those. All right, and these last two are, AI is coming, that train has left the station, so how to leverage it, right? And there's got to be businesses out there that today could benefit from incorporating AI, machine learning and so forth, automation, but maybe don't know where to look, right? And that would be super helpful, because most of the demand is on the repetitive, low skill jobs. So if you can find a way to take the pressure off those jobs through automation and machine learning, that's a win. That's a big deal for the state. So there should be a role for this organization to play in providing information, providing best practices, symposia, things like that to help companies close that knowledge gap. And similarly with green tech. So help companies, create white papers or create symposia that help companies understand the benefits of green technology. Okay, thoughts, comments?
There is a comment in the chat from Edward Bennett. It's quite lengthy. So Edward, would you like to unmute yourself and state your comment?
Sure. Thanks, everyone. This was just about the diversity piece. What I wrote in brief was the entire concept of DEI integration is based on all of these ideas that we've been talking about, or that you all were talking about during those pieces. Nick's comment earlier about autism, we work with the Latino population. I know that we showed those graphs a little while ago that differentiate between what the workforce looks like now versus the workforce in the next 20, 30, 40 years in terms of minority representation. 80% of the ethnic minorities in Utah are Latino. It's the fastest growing segment of fastest growing demographic within Utah and the United States, as well as from just a pure economic and business perspective. Latina owned businesses are the single fastest growing demographic within small business and economic development, and have been for the last 7 or 8 years. So just that idea that DEI, and I know a lot of folks that live in Utah, whenever we talk about DEI or anything that has to do with these kind of feel good topics or what some folks would consider wokeness, people tend to turn a deaf eye, geez. People tend to turn, you know what I mean, about that, and they get turned off right off the bat. So I think when we're talking about these things within the community, we need to be able to convey that the ways that we've done things for the last 150 years just cannot continue into the 21st, the next 3/4 of the 21st century. The workforce is changing, the way we view the world is changing, the global economy is changing, the fact that we have a global economy and we didn't 50 or 60, 70 years ago. All of these things are relevant when it comes to what does it actually mean to have a diverse population of employees within the things we're talking about. And you had mentioned, pre-pandemic, you all, and we had a workforce generally of middle-class women, white men. And that's continuing to evolve in and of itself. And the last part I wanted to talk about that was within the new economy, diversity of thought is one of the most significant features of what does it mean to be successful, or how can we drive these businesses and economies and markets to greater levels of success than we've had in the past. And that's diversity of thought. Right. Bringing women into the boardroom, bringing people of color into the boardroom, into the C-suites, into that sort of development makes a significant difference and has a significant impact in the way companies and organizations can run. That's all.
Thanks, Edward.
Sure.
Yeah, great points. I mean, and really, when you go back to that Texas Instrument example, if we don't change the trajectory of educational attainment of minorities, they're not going to have workers in 15 years. I mean, that's just the reality. And so it's a big deal. It really is. It has to become a focus. All right, that's all I had. So, Marcia, back to you.
Yeah, I hope you can see, if you go back, Rosie, or I guess I can do this. Oh, I'll send out or Rosie will send out the information, these presentations to you. But you'll see there that we've got our SWOT analysis. We did both an external one and an internal one, kind of lessons learned from the last SWOT analysis. You'll see just some basic data that so the backing or the analysis of the findings is all in the data in the back end here. But I wanted to go back to, sorry, I don't want to make you too sick by going back. So look away, look away. I want to go back to this piece. the reason that we took the direction, or the reason that we started down this direction, was because of these high level topics. They kept coming up over and over and over again. You know, we would hit on, I'll just say, water was, you know, something that somebody would hit on, but it wasn't like over and over and over again. And I think it again, maybe had more to do with growth, had housing, those kind of things. And so that's why we focused on the recommendations that we've discussed. So. Right?
Yeah.
It was right. Yeah. Any other questions, comments?
Any other questions or comments from those in the room? If not, Rosie, anybody online that's in the chat or raise their hand? If you're online, if you have any comments or questions, now's the time to do that.
Michaela?
Sure. I just commented on the point about automation of lower paying or lower skilled jobs as kind of the main strategy for reducing that demand, and just kind of pointing out the other side, which is, you know, making those jobs more attractive, and that there are places that have like figured out strategies to retain that workforce.
Good point.
I have another question. I know in some sectors of our workforces or businesses that run their businesses, most of them are the lower end jobs that actually end up going into, you know, management and that kind of stuff. What are we doing along those lines? I mean, my daughter's a manager for a restaurant chain. One of her biggest problems is finding people that can cook. And yes, we've got these other, you know, these schools and stuff that help along this area. She'd ask her employees, can you find me anybody else that would like to come and work? And I mean, for me, $25 an hour, that's pretty good pay, especially when it can be overtime and all that kind of stuff. But what she's finding out is I don't think we have, and this goes further than I think you guys, I think it's more on my side and his side, legislation to be able to get workers into the United States, because not our people want to work. There's still that scenario that I don't think you've touched on, or maybe you have, but we can't find employees to work in the lower paid jobs. Yeah, if you're going to give me $30 or $40 an hour, yeah, anybody will come to work. But you offer them $20 an hour and they go, I'll sit at home. So what are we going to do about that workforce and those kinds of jobs that we have plenty of needs for that we're not doing anything about?
Have any recommendations there?
Well, one is that great points, really great points. The narrative about you know, people sitting at home, that was one of the things we looked at, right? Because we've heard that, and you know, the requirements have changed on that over the last little while, and the current data suggests that there's not, at least in Utah, that's not a big number. It's gone way down. So I mean, there might be anecdotes around that, but with the exception of those in the poverty level, you know, that have a little lower workforce participation, for the most part, it's pretty healthy by comparison.
So then the question I have is why are we not seeking legislations where we can bring in workers to help us? Because as one of the major cooks in her chain says, I can find you lots of people, but they're not documented. So what are we going to do about that situation, to where, since all of our people are employed, if that's the case, if they're all employed, which they were at a period of time, what are we going to do to bring in more people to help us to improve this economy that we're trying to build.
To add to that, when there was a slide that talked about the 90% of Hispanics that aren't seeking higher ed, I even thought to myself, okay, I love the idea of upskilling everybody. But then there becomes a vacuum, right? So if we've got the low skill, like I cannot say hallelujah enough to what Commissioner is saying here. Sitting on NACO's National Association of Counties Immigration and Reform Task Force, we have a systemic problem with being more welcoming as the nation many people would like it to be portrayed. And I would love to believe that we are, but I mean, I'm just going to say it bluntly, both political parties don't care to solve this problem. And yet our employers in northern part of Utah are screaming that they need those workers. And it doesn't matter where they come from, but if it's a land of opportunity, then let's open the door to the opportunity, because our employers are either going to automate where they can and incur a very capital intensive payment up front that even when market conditions slow and the demand for their products that they can produce with automation dip, they won't have the revenue stream to pay for it. And as callous as this sounds, in a typical manual labor market, you can lay off folks during that period of time and then bring them back if they're low skilled. But if the skill, whether it's high or low, isn't there and they can automate, then they will automate. And I mean, there's just a multitude of issues that, you know, I love that slide. Again, I'm all for upskilling, and I love what Mr. Bennett said about DEI is embedded in every other element, even if it's not overtly just said, create a DEI committee. If we're doing all the other parts of this presentation correctly, it's already inherently built in. But where are we going to fill these vacuums that we will just inadvertently create? Problem we all know is we're just not producing enough workers, whether internally, because if it's internal that's taking those higher paid jobs, fantastic. But from Boeing to Micron, they're all saying, you don't have enough. So we don't have enough of the high skilled. We don't have enough of the low skilled. The problem's much bigger than what is overtly being said in those slides.
But if I could touch on that, just to restate the obvious, and Ms. Wilbanks will attest to this from her construction sector. Housing is on there. Affordability is on the tip of everyone's tongue. We're starting to lean on the cities and municipalities saying, you need to tighten your belts. You need to deal with impact fees. You got to do all this stuff without taking the largest piece of that cost into account, which is labor. And we can't get, and we're not going to be able to automate a sheetrock guy. We're not going to be able to automate the framer in most cases. But those costs, until we've got an ample labor pool, we're always going to be behind this 8 ball. And so while it's not the job of this committee to solve national immigration, I believe that conversation has to be part of any conversation. The political lobbying, for lack of a better term, of our national people has to be part of that conversation, or we're spinning our wheels.
To go right on that, might I suggest then that if it's not in our SEDS, which is a document that EDA sees, do they really think it's a big problem? So it would be my humble suggestion that if this group collectively or majoritively would think that that's a big deal, then to Mr. Sloan's point, we probably ought to have something like that in the SEDS so that the folks that give us that kind of funding can see that we actually are feeling that strain.
And to go along with that just a little bit further, I know I've been working with, because trying to find people, I worked with high school students to try to get them into programs in adult ed, where I came from, adult education. And in that adult education background, we're creating programs to bring in these lower end paid jobs, but yet they're not low end paid jobs. Then it goes back to the housing, is can they afford anything within that? And I know Commissioner Frohr and myself, we're working on affordable housing as much as we can, but we can't do everything that has to do with affordable housing. In creating these jobs, we have to look at an education from a lower level sometimes maybe from the high school levels to help bring in this kind of information, kind of workforce. I think our number one thing is workforce, and we need to really concentrate on something like that within our group.
Great points. I agree with everything that we just said. And I would agree that that's something we should probably look at in terms of recommendations, because, I think anybody that's been around in business or the public sector for the last few years understands the lack of especially for first-time business owners starting companies. It's just hard to find anybody because nobody, again, wants to work that's legal for 20 or 25 bucks an hour. So we need to look at some solutions for that. And I agree, they are legislative outside this room's capability of doing, but I think we should make people aware of it as they visit our federal and as we bring on new federal officials, let them know how important it is, especially for a growing state like we have in Utah. It relates to housing, the workforce relates to everything. And until we start looking at that issue, I think we're going to have a difficult time really growing the economy the way that it's capable of growing. So with that, Marcia?
If you don't mind, I have one quick comment from Mayor Berube in North Ogden, who said, "I agree, every job is valuable to our state. However, remote jobs do not result in sales tax, which is an important funding mechanism for local government," which is an interesting comment.
Yeah.
And
Well, I'm
I can go
assuming that center concept we talked about earlier would also include some type of commercial/retail. So it's not all about housing. It's about generating sales tax revenue, which we understand needs to be the three-legged stool, which is property tax, sales tax, and income tax. And I know from the cities and county standpoint, we rely upon the latter too. So.
Yeah, yep, good point.
So within that, the person from North Ogden mentioned it very well. Sales tax. Everybody complains about property taxes. Sales tax is a way in which we can bring in the most revenue because we do it according to what we can spend. So, if you make more money, yes, you're going to bring in more sales tax. And everybody likes to eat too. And that's where you bring in a lot of sales tax.
And can I also mention the part of the center's value is it makes that public space where people want to go out and be there. And right now, one of the challenges with retail is local retailers are competing with online retailers where it's, is it worth it for me to leave my house to buy, this item that I want? I could do it online where I can very easily look at other people's reviews, have this wide variety. All I have to do is wait one day for shipping. Or do I go down the street to look at a more limited option? And if you have that center where people are living closer to it, it's more convenient for them to go out and shop and maybe more experiential. That changes the dynamics, right? It weights it a little bit more to, I might as well go out and shop and enjoy myself down in our city center.
Taken away from him.
I defer to the commission.
So along that line of what you're talking about is these walkable areas because, having that, well, even within those walkable areas, if we want to have a real walkable area, and I'm thinking of my own county, which is just over the hill from his. And he would love to have a restaurant down over the canyon from him. That's a very good restaurant. Well, the problem is the people in that area are affluent people. They may not want their kids to go work at a restaurant. And I know he loves steaks because he's visited my daughter's restaurant. And so you look at that and you go, where are we going to end up bringing in the workers to work in those kinds of places? We can't build our community, Mountain Green, Morgan County, Mountain Green area, what I'm talking about. We can't build that if we don't have enough workforce. And even if you have a walkable area, which we're trying to build, we still got to have employees. We've still got to have that labor force. And now let Sean take.
I was just going to add an extra point to I respect all of us that are here, our stakeholders that are important, but we're missing one when it comes to property tax that I feel that the statement of remote workers is a good thing and that there wasn't a downside. And one thing that I thought of right away when that comment was made was, if I was a school district, I would wholly disagree with that because they don't benefit from sales tax. They benefit solely from the property tax. And so if that capital improvement doesn't exist for the employer, for that employee to be at, then they may actually have sales tax because they may spend their discretionary income at a restaurant or grocery store or something else, but they're actually not improving commercially zoned property somewhere because they're not housed there. And yet, if they are here remotely working and have children in the school district gets the cost side but has no benefit side then. So while all of us here with a current seat at the table, it's a different kind of perspective of diversity inclusion because we're not involving one of the other taxing entities that oftentimes for economic development is asked to pay the most, but also bears a certain amount of cost for a healthy community, meaning children, diversity of, activities taking place in a community, our future workforce. So they actually do need that property tax.
Okay, what else? Marcia?
Well, I was just going to talk a little bit about our next steps, if you don't mind.
Yeah, let's do it.
I don't have a slide, but I'll let you. So our first step was to get some feedback, and I really, really appreciate everybody's comments and feedback. And I can hear Trina over there taking a lot of notes. We'll go back and refine our recommendations. I think the next step for what we'll do is we'll put this together. I don't know, should we just send the findings and recommendations out, or do you think in a bigger document? Do you,
So I think first pass.
yeah,
So maybe we'll just
Yeah.
update this based on what we've heard today, send out the revised version, and then the next thing will be the full report.
yeah, this is a 3-pager of the presentation. We will send the presentation out as well. We have to have this signed, sealed, and in a pretty bow by September 30th. So we still have another shot or two. And what I would like to do is send this out. And if you have more feedback, we would love to hear it. Maybe go back, talk a little bit with the people in your bubbles and get back to me with any other recommendations or concerns or questions. And then in the meantime, what these guys are doing is they're putting the actual document together so that we can submit it to the EDA. And then in our September meeting, we will approve it and we'll do a final approval, but you'll get a draft of that document before we send it out. So.
Great.
But
Okay,
please,
anybody
more
else?
feedback is great.
So just so we're clear, you didn't send out the findings and recommendations to the full committee,
We have not yet.
but you will.
We will.
Okay.
And this is.
And this. So just for those listening online, so you will receive the findings and recommendations that we went through in the presentation. What I would suggest, and also kind of a summary, take a little time to go through those. What I would hope that between now and September 30th, maybe quite a ways before September 30th, any changes or comments or questions on those recommendations or objectives, please get back with Marcia so we can talk about that at the September 30th meeting. Again, this is a work in progress. This is not something that we're just looking for you for us to rubber stamp and move on. We want your recommendations. If changes, suggestions brought up today were great suggestions. We need to make sure if this is going to be a working document for the future, we need to consider all aspects of really how we can work this committee to improve the economy and across the Wasatch Choice. So with that, I want to thank Better City for the work. I really appreciate this. When this first started out a couple of years ago, and I'm always a little pessimistic about studies and what we're going to see at the end of the day. This was really an effort that's going to bear any fruit. I'm glad to see these recommendations, and I'm happy to see that you, in my opinion, you've pretty much hit this on the head of as far as what direction we need to go. I don't think we've got any definite solutions, but at least you've given us some food for thought and some parameters we can work within. So committee, please take the time to look at that, get back with Marcia, and she'll communicate with Better City. Ted, did you have a comment?
Well, I just wondered, Jason, Marcia, Trina, if you wanted to put a finer point on when you want comments back by.
Yeah, what's your time frame on that?
2 weeks would be great.
Okay.
So we'd like to, just because we want to turn this, get it back to you while it's still fresh. So if we get comments within 2 weeks, we can incorporate those within 3 weeks or so, get it back to everyone.
Okay, so we'll call that mid-July, July 15. How's that? All right, we're gonna call,
Mr. Chair, can I make a brief, can I say one last thing?
go ahead.
Andrew, just that, one of the things that I hope we accomplish in the report is talking about who is responsible or who has the opportunity to implement the recommendations. We've talked some today about, what is the role of the EDD and what are the things we can take on as a group and what are the things WFRC can take on. And we never want to step on the toes of the counties or the cities or the economic development agencies. If the report identifies steps to be taken, strategies to be employed, and makes recommendations, let's also have in there who we think are the parties that are best suited to move forward on those things, even if it requires some partnership and collaboration to get things done.
Yeah, that goes with that. So I think we know this is not going to be driven by the WFRC. This will be driven by the private sector and the public sector. And I think it's our job to get that information out so they can enact that in terms of ordinance, et cetera, to make this work. Yeah. All right, any further questions, comments? If not, again, thank to Better City, to staff, Marcia, Rosie, Andrew for being online, Vice Chair, Mayor Wynn, we thank you. If nobody else has any comments, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. And we would see you on September 30th.
20th.
September 20th, excuse me. Yeah, okay. Glad you corrected that. My eyes aren't working that great today, so. Okay, I'd entertain a motion. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries, thank you. Appreciate you being with us.
Thanks, guys. Gals. People.
Thank you.
Guys, gals, people.
Thanks, Marcia.